Grandfather, look at our brokenness.
We know that in all creation, only the human family has strayed from the sacred way.
We know that we are the ones who are divided.
And we are the ones who must come back together to walk in the sacred way.
Grandfather, Sacred One, teach us love, compassion, and honor.
That we may heal the earth and heal each other.
From the Ojibwe Indians of North America. I don't usually read straight off the script, but today this is a preaching assignment that I did in class on Tuesday. So you guys get the luxury of it all being written out very carefully and meticulously. I put on the board behind me all the references that I have for the historical information that I put forward in this particular sermon. And the reason I wrote those down is because I talked to some Native American history professors from OU and Kansas State, and those were the links that they guided me to for resources for this particular sermon. Remembering the guest at our table is us, a Thanksgiving reboot. There was a time when the land upon which we now call home was inhabited ocean to ocean, ice cap to ice cap, with a plurality of nations and peoples. They had art, language, writing, political policy, various forms of democracy, and culture defined by region and birth. These people had worship and communion with a power greater than themselves. It incorporated their music, their poetry, their dances and celebrations, delineated times for festivals and solemn reflection. They functioned with other nations within this continent through treaties and battles. They hunted and harvested food for their tables. They made and raised children, and as their individual cultures dictated, helped their neighbor, cared for their sick, fed their hungry, nursed their elderly, and in general got on with a certain amount of peace and prosperity. One of these nations was the Confederacy of the Algonquian-speaking peoples, known as the League of the Delaware, of which the Wampanoag were a part. It is the Wampanoag people to whom the Pilgrims from England owe their survival. As Chuck Larson, a man of diverse indigenous bloodlines and Eastern Native American historical scholar, writes in his essay for the Montauk American Indian Council, the religion of the Wampanoag people taught them to give charity to the helpless and hospitality to anyone who came to them with empty hands. It was with this in mind that Tisquantum, better known by the name given to him by the colonials, Squanto, used the English language he learned while bound in slavery across the Atlantic to guide starving Puritan settlers in the ways of surviving and thriving in this unfamiliar new world. It is because of Tisquantum's help that the settlers were able to survive the first winter of 1620 to 1621. Now, the Wampanoag people, like most of the other indigenous tribes in that region, regularly throughout the year participated in Thanksgiving festivals. There was the festival for the first fish of spring, the bounty of the summer corn, tapping of the maple trees, and the fall harvest. These days of thanks dedicated to the earth and their ancestors were regular occurrences long before the Pilgrims made their way to these shores. The Pilgrims, for their part, were not only fleeing religious persecution in England and Holland, but were also a splinter faction of revolutionary fighters who decided it would be easier to prepare for the imminent return of Jesus in a new Eden, the new world, than overthrow the monarchy in England. They were a city and rural people unaccustomed to living in the wood, off the wild land, without fences or fields or groceries. They were unprepared for the life they had chosen and poorly equipped to survive the harsh conditions of the new world they hoped to inhabit. Fully half of the original Mayflower settlers were dead by the time the first winter ended. They too began a practice of Thanksgiving, but unlike the Wampanoag people, the Pilgrims' Thanksgiving was a result of insufficient food and sustenance. After days of fasting, a thanksgiving would be given to the Lord for their ability to eat what little there was before them. This usually consisted of meager vegetables and whatever limited game could be caught. Because of an agreement between the Wampanoag leader Massasoit and the Pilgrims upon their arrival, both had declared their fidelity to the other in protection against outside enemies. This means that the Wampanoag would protect the Pilgrims against harm, and the Pilgrims would extend this same protection to the Wampanoag. The Pilgrims had a love-hate relationship with the Wampanoag. While they found Tisquantum a blessing from the Lord, they referred to the rest of the Wampanoag community as devils and savages. The differences between their two cultures could not have been more dramatic. It was after this first winter that the Pilgrims had their first successful harvest. During their celebration, in the fashion of everyone who has gunpowder, they shot off rifles and cannons. The noise alerted Massasoit, who sent 90 of his armed warriors to investigate the sounds of battle. Upon arrival, the 20 to 30 settlers were surprised by the presence of so many Wampanoag. Massasoit, seeing it was a celebration, sent his men back for food to share. Here I must say that no native historians I've read support a theory of settlers inviting the natives to eat. Most put forth that the Wampanoag supplied almost all of the food and stayed for 3 days, as they would for their own traditional Thanksgiving celebrations. It is from this interaction that we get the Thanksgiving holiday. It should be noted that the settlers, whose numbers grew with each new boat, soon outnumbered the Wampanoag. Through disease and conflict, much of the Wampanoag community died. The settlers eventually rallied against the Wampanoag and their Pequot allies in 1637, killing approximately 700 men, women, and children. After which, they celebrated a holiday declared by the then Massachusetts colony governor, John Winthrop, called Thanksgiving, thanking God for the safe return of the men sent to kill the native community. The war and genocide that followed was called the King Philip's War. At this point, I'd like to remind you that we are all here, the other, at the table. We are the outsider, bullying our way through our own stories with little regard for those stories around us. We don't tell this story. Why don't we tell this story for our Thanksgiving celebrations? Well, because during the struggle of our Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln helped perpetuate the myth of a grand dining together in an effort to unify a fractured country. It was this myth of cheery relations and magnanimous camaraderie that we are told today. But this belies the depth of truth we can experience at this culturally festive time in our national calendar. We are called by our European ancestry, our Western Christian identity, to remember that we were the outsiders starving. We were the religious zealots seeking sanctuary. We were the refugees searching for a calm port, taken in and protected by the Wampanoag. They could have left us to die, and if they had, we may be living and participating in a much different world under much different circumstances today. The Wampanoag treatment of pilgrims cost them their homes, their families, their culture, their lives, and almost their very existence as a people. We, the descendants of Western Europe, owe them more than a tip of a hat thank you. We owe them more than a whitewashed history of events that denies their integral part in our survival. We, whose own religious history connects directly to the Puritans and their practices upon this land, owe the Wampanoag respect and honor for the bravery of their actions and the fortitude to follow their beliefs and convictions, even to their own detriment. Which brings me back to the guest at your table. This is a mess I'm going to make. This is a program designed by the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee to produce capital to protect people in need. The box you place on your table is the other guest. I implore you to remember that that other is you. These funds do not just go to food or shelter or community building. They go to protecting, educating, and empowering those in need. Empowering them to excel in life, not just survive. When you take home your box today, I want you to think of who that guest is. I want you to remember that not only are you protecting another in hardship, you are preparing another to help someone else in hardship in the future. The Wampanoag did not live to see their investment in our survival produce beneficial results for them. But we can turn their lineage of hospitality into our Thanksgiving observance. We can work towards righting the wrongs of our colonial history. We can remember to treat those whose ancestors treated us so well with the appropriate hospitality we have neglected for so many years. Here we stand on the wake of war and terrorism, watching people flee their homes, leave behind their accumulated lives to survive. And the message of that first Thanksgiving calls through the centuries. The Wampanoag remind us to give charity to the helpless and hospitality to anyone who comes to us with empty hands. We cannot, in light of our history, now turn away from the empty hands of others. We cannot leave them helpless without protection out of fear for our own survival. This is not the legacy the Wampanoag left us. If you need a response within Christianity upon which to hang that action, look to Hebrews 13:2. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. The verse does not admonish us to show hospitality to angels, to people we know are good and righteous beings. We are to show hospitality to all, because some of them may be angels. And that is my message to you today. Tell your children and family about the truly great and noble hospitality extended to us by the Wampanoag. Find it in your hearts to extend that depth of hospitality to others. And curtail your desire to see the payoff for your good works, or deny your compassionate heart out of fear. It isn't about you. It's about the guest at the table. The guest who was once you.